and in this video we're going to discuss the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is the system that releases hormones into the bloodstream. You've probably heard of exocrine. Exocrine is another system that releases secretions onto surfaces, through glands, and so on. But the main difference between endocrine and exocrine is the fact that endocrine does not use glands or modes of passages. It just directly transports the hormones into the bloodstream, while exocrine requires the use of glands and other mechanisms to secrete onto surfaces. But in this video, we're focusing mainly on endocrine system. So like I mentioned before earlier on, a system is made up of different organs. And the organs we have here, the primary controllers of everything, are the pituitary, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. Okay, so this is the hypothalamus. This is your brain. This is your brain. I mean, a brain. And this is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is under the thalamus in the diencephalon of the brain stem. This is really not a great picture, but I'll talk about this in a future video when I'm talking more about the brain. But basically, this is what we have. We have the hypothalamus, and then we have the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is this whole thing. This whole thing, just so you know, this is the whole pituitary gland. It's just that it has two different lobes, the anterior and the posterior. The anterior is the Adenohypophysis, and the posterior is really, well, I'll discuss it better in another video. I want to keep it very simple for the basics, but this whole thing is the pituitary gland. So basically, the hypothalamus releases hormones. So these hormones are either inhibitory or releasing in nature. You have things like your thyrotropin inhibiting hormone, or growth inhibiting hormone, or growth releasing hormone, things like that. Those hormones are from the hypothalamus, and they pass through something called the infundibulum. So the infundibulum is a passageway for hormones from the hypothalamus to get into the pituitary gland. And these hormones from the hypothalamus, guess what they do? They are like, oh, release another hormone created by the pituitary gland to go to the target organ. And that's when you start to have all these chain and complex scenarios. But before we go into all those chains of what the pituitary gland does and how it controls things, let's describe the other parts of the pituitary gland, the posterior lobe. So what the posterior lobe does is, the hypothalamus has another unique thing going for it. The hypothalamus is, as it produces hormones, releasing or inhibiting hormones, it also produces two special hormones. Antidiuretic hormone, let me spell it out, antidiuretic hormone. This hormone is used to conserve water in the body. So it's used to store water, keep water in the body. When it's released, it's telling the body, hey, do not release water. And it's used in the regulation of a lot of things, especially when you're releasing urine and other things. But it is produced by the hypothalamus. Another very important thing, hormone that the hypothalamus produces, is oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is produced or released during childbirth, especially during contractions, and it's also linked to helping, it helps in the production of milk, basically. So these are the two important hormones that the hypothalamus produces. So the fun thing about this is, well, the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, its whole function is to receive these and store these two hormones. Like the hypothalamus produces it, and then it flows all the way down to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Other regulating and inhibiting hormones produced by the hypothalamus goes to the anterior. Let me redraw that. Goes to the anterior. So basically, the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland is for inhibition and regulating, while the posterior lobe is for ADH and oxytocin. Well, oxytocin is a short form for oxytocin, OXY, basically. So I guess that summarizes the pituitary gland. As we go on, I'll give more detail about how the chain of how the hormones call to each other and so on. But for now, I think that's a pretty good overview for, oh, this is the hypothalamus and this is the pituitary gland, and this is what they do and how they relate to each other. Oh, fun fact, the hypothalamus goes straight to the medullary cavity of the adrenal gland and helps in the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. But will be explained further in a future video. Thank you for listening.